Most of what you want was not chosen by you. Not really. Not in the way you think. You believe you want the things you pursue. You believe the hunger you feel is yours. That the craving, the pull, the restless reaching towards something just slightly out of reach. That all of this originates in some authentic part of you that has genuinely decided what it values and what it needs. But what if that's not true? What if the majority of your wanting, the wanting that shapes your days and drives your decisions and quietly determines the direction of your entire life, what if most of that wanting was installed in you by forces you never examined, by systems designed specifically to generate craving you cannot satisfy, by wounds so old you've forgotten their wounds and started calling them personality? What if you have been living inside a desire you did not choose, chasing relief you will never find, in directions that were selected for you before you were old enough to question them? Plato saw this, not as a metaphor, not as a vague intuition about human nature, as a precise philosophical observation about the structure of the soul and the specific mechanism by which the lowest part of it takes control of a life and never lets go. He described it with a clarity that has not been improved upon in 2,500 years. And once you understand what he saw, you will never look at your own, wanting the same way again. Begin with a moment you will recognize. You are not particularly hungry. You are not in any real distress. By any reasonable measure, you have enough. Enough food, enough comfort, enough distraction available to you that the immediate moment contains nothing that demands to be fixed. And yet there is a pull toward the phone, toward the food you don't need, toward the scroll that will consume an hour you intended to use differently, toward the purchase that will feel significant for approximately 40 minutes before settling into the background of things you own and rarely think about, toward the conversation that will give you a brief hit of connection before the loneliness returns slightly heavier than before. You follow the pull, almost automatically, sometimes before you've consciously registered that you were about to. And afterward, if you notice at all, there is a faint quality of having been moved rather than having moved, as if something else made the decision and your conscious mind simply went along with it. That experience, that specific texture of being driven rather than driving, is what Plato spent a significant portion of his philosophical life trying to understand and describe. He had a name for the part of the soul responsible for it. He called it the appetitive soul, the epithumedikon, the part that wants. And he believed it was the most powerful, the most dangerous, and the most misunderstood force in human psychological life. To understand what Plato meant by the appetitive soul, you have to understand what he was distinguishing it from. He divided the soul into three parts: the rational, the spirited, and the appetitive. Each one is a distinct source of motivation. Each one wants different things, operates on a different timescale, and responds to different kinds of input. The rational soul thinks in years, in consequences, in the shape of a life. It can hold the future clearly and weigh present choices against long-term outcomes. It is the part of you that makes plans, sets intentions, understands patterns, and knows with clarity what a better version of your life would require. The spirited soul, which Plato called thumos, operates through pride and shame and the burning need to be someone worthy of respect. It's the fire, the part that generates courage and dignity and the refusal to be diminished. It cares about meaning and worthiness and the story you tell about who you are. And then there is the appetitive soul. The appetitive soul does not think in years. It barely thinks in hours. It operates in the immediate present, in the specific sensation available right now, in the resolution of whatever tension is currently active in the body or the nervous system. It wants food, warmth, physical pleasure, relief from discomfort, the end of tension, stimulation when there is boredom, calm when there is agitation, more when there is less, and then more again. Plato described it as the largest part of the soul, not largest in nobility or importance, but largest in sheer mass and appetite, the part that, if left ungoverned, will expand to fill every available space in a life. And here is what makes it different from the other two parts in a way that changes everything. It has no natural ceiling. Reason reaches toward specific truths and can, in principle, reach them. Thumos seeks worthy recognition and can, in moments, feel it has been genuinely honored, but appetite satisfies and then wants again. The food resolves hunger temporarily, and then hunger returns. the pleasure fades and the desire for pleasure returns, sometimes amplified by the memory of satisfaction. The relief is real but brief, and the thing that needed relieving comes back. This is not a flaw. This is the design. The body's systems for hunger and thirst and warmth are supposed to return after being satisfied, because the body needs to eat and drink and seek warmth again. These are survival mechanisms, ancient and necessary. The problem is not that these mechanisms exist. The problem is what happens when they are no longer governing only the body's genuine needs, but have been extended, through a process Plato could see and modern psychology has confirmed, into every dimension of a human life. Plato made a distinction that most people in the modern world desperately need to hear. He distinguished between necessary appetites and unnecessary appetites. Necessary appetites are the desires that serve genuine need, hunger that is satisfied by food, thirst satisfied by water, the desire for rest satisfied by sleep. These desires arise from real deficits and are resolved by real satisfactions. They are natural, appropriate, and not in themselves problematic. Unnecessary appetites are different. These are desires that arise not from genuine need, but from habit, from conditioning, from the training of the soul toward particular pleasures, until those pleasures feel like necessities. The desire to check the phone every few minutes is not a necessary appetite. There is no genuine deficit that it addresses, but it has the phenomenological quality of one. It arrives with the texture of need, of something that should be resolved. And if you've been following it consistently for long enough, resisting it feels like a real deprivation, not just an inconvenience. Plato saw this mechanism operating in his world around food, wine, sex, money, and power. The person who has trained themselves to want ever more refined pleasures, ever greater quantities, ever more specific satisfactions, has not discovered deeper needs. They have cultivated unnecessary appetites until those appetites feel indistinguishable from genuine ones. The modern world has industrialized this process. Every system of consumption you interact with daily has been engineered with extraordinary precision and resources to convert your necessary appetites into unnecessary ones, and then to ensure that the unnecessary ones can never be fully satisfied. Social media platforms are not designed to connect you. They are designed to generate a specific neurological response, the anticipation of reward, which is more addictive than reward itself, and to keep you in a perpetual state of almost satisfied. Scrolling is not a behavior you developed because it met a genuine need. It is a behavior that was engineered to hijack the neurological systems that evolved to address genuine needs and redirect them toward a product. The food industry has spent decades and billions of dollars discovering the precise combinations of salt, sugar, fat, and texture that override the body's natural satiety signals and produce a desire to continue eating that is entirely disconnected from hunger. The attention economy has restructured the architecture of daily life around the harvesting of whatever spare capacity of wanting you might have and directing it toward products and content and outrage and aspiration. You are not living in a neutral environment and choosing your desires freely. You are living in an environment specifically designed to install desires in you that serve the interests of the systems generating them, not your own. Plato could not have imagined the specific mechanisms of the 21st century, but he understood the fundamental dynamic with complete clarity. The appetitive soul, left ungoverned, does not remain static. It grows. It trains itself toward more complex and less satisfying forms of wanting. It reaches for things that feel like they should satisfy and then discovers they don't, and reaches further. And a life governed entirely by this process ends somewhere very specific. He called it tyranny. Not in the political sense, though he applied the same logic there. In the personal sense. The soul that is ruled by its appetites becomes, eventually, enslaved by them. Every waking hour organized around the servicing of wants that can never be genuinely met. Every relationship evaluated for what it can provide. Every moment assessed for its pleasure yield. Every discomfort treated as an emergency to be resolved immediately by whatever is most available. He described the tyrannical soul as the least free of all souls, not because of external constraint, but because of internal one. The person whose appetites govern them is not free to choose their direction. Their direction is already determined by the next craving. Look at that description and ask whether it maps onto anything in contemporary life. Here is where it gets personal in a way that most philosophy does not. The appetites that are controlling you are not random. They are not arbitrary. They were shaped by something. Plato understood that the soul is not born fully formed with its desires already in place. The desires develop. They are educated, in the broad sense of that word, shaped by experience, by what was rewarded and what was punished, by what provided relief in moments of distress, by what the surrounding culture treated as valuable and desirable. The child who learned that food was comfort, that eating was the thing that happened when something felt wrong, did not choose that association. It was installed. And it runs, decades later, as an appetite that has nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with the original wound it was trained to address. The person who learned that achievement was the mechanism for receiving love, that being impressive was the condition for being valued, did not choose to want success the way they wanted. The wanting was shaped by an environment that made approval conditional and taught the soul to pursue its conditions with the urgency of survival. The desire that feels most like yours, the one so fundamental you've never questioned whether you chose it, is often the one most thoroughly installed by something outside you. This is not an excuse. Plato was not interested in excuses. He was interested in understanding, because understanding is the prerequisite for any genuine change. You cannot govern a desire you have not examined. You cannot redirect a wanting you believe is simply who you are. The first act of genuine freedom, in Plato's framework, is the examination of your own appetite. Not to condemn it, not to pretend you don't feel it, but to ask, with genuine philosophical curiosity, whether this desire is truly yours, whether it serves a real need, and whether following it is actually moving you toward anything you have genuinely chosen to value. Most people never ask these questions, not because they are incapable, but because the environment they live in has a strong interest in ensuring they don't. Examined desires are much harder to monetize than unexamined ones. Plato had a specific term for the condition of a soul that has allowed appetite to govern it without examination. He called it Pleonexia. It means, roughly, the desire for more, the insatiable reaching that cannot be satisfied by any specific amount, because satisfaction was never really what it was looking for. Pleonexia is not simply greed in the ordinary sense. It's a structural condition of the soul, a state in which the appetite has been trained to want not specific things that would address specific needs, but simply more. More of whatever the last thing was. More reassurance, more stimulation, more status, more pleasure, more security, more connection, more novelty. The person in the grip of pleonexia is not satisfied by getting what they want, because what they want is not really the thing they're reaching for. The thing they're reaching for is the resolution of something deeper, a wound, an absence, a fear, and no amount of the available satisfaction addresses that. So they reach further, get more, feel, briefly, that this might be the thing that finally resolves it, and discover again that it isn't. Plato described this as the soul drinking from a leaking vessel. You pour in the satisfaction. It drains away. You pour in more. It drains away faster. The problem is not the amount of satisfaction available. The problem is the vessel itself, and the vessel cannot be repaired by more pouring. This description maps with uncomfortable precision onto the specific quality of modern dissatisfaction, not the dissatisfaction of genuine deprivation, of people who lack what they need and know specifically what they need. The dissatisfaction of people who have more than any generation in history has ever had, whose needs by any historical standard are comprehensively met, and who feel a persistent, aching emptiness that more of everything has consistently failed to address. The vessel is leaking, and the solution being offered by every system that profits from your wanting is more. More content, more products, more experiences, more optimization, more self-improvement, more productivity, more achievement, more connection, more stimulation, more of the water that drains away before it can nourish anything. Plato would look at this and say, with the patience of someone who has thought very carefully about something, that the vessel must be repaired before the water can help. And the vessel is repaired not by getting more, but by examining what the wanting is actually for. There is a passage in Plato's Republic where he describes something he calls the democratic soul. He's making a political argument, but the psychological description is so precise that it reads like a diagnosis of the present moment. The democratic soul, he says, is one that treats all desires as equal. That does not distinguish between necessary and unnecessary appetites. That gives every craving the same weight and the same right to be satisfied. Today I want to study philosophy. Tomorrow I want to spend the day in meaningless pleasure. The day after I want to fast and exercise. The day after that I want to drink and be lazy. All of these are just desires. All are equally valid. All get their turn. The democratic soul, Plato argues, is not free. It is at the mercy of whichever desire happens to be loudest in any given moment. It has no stable direction because it has refused to make any genuine hierarchy of value. Every appetite is equal, so no appetite can be governed by anything above it. This is not a description of political democracy. It is a description of a specific approach to the self that is almost universally encouraged by contemporary culture. Follow your feelings. Honor your desires. Your wants are valid. Your cravings are telling you something. Listen to your body. Give yourself what you need. Some of this is true. The body does communicate genuine needs. Not every desire deserves to be overridden, but the wholesale elevation of all desire to the status of valid self-expression, the refusal to distinguish between the appetite that serves genuine flourishing and the appetite that is consuming you, that is not liberation. That is what Plato called the first stage of tyranny, because a soul that will not govern its appetites does not remain in pleasant democratic equality for long. The appetites are not all equal in their force, and the strongest, the most insistent, the most immediately rewarding gradually take over. The democratic soul becomes by degrees a soul dominated by its most powerful cravings, and then it wonders why it cannot stop. So, what does Plato actually recommend? He is not recommending asceticism. He is not saying desire is evil or that the body's needs should be ignored or that pleasure is inherently corrupting. He is recommending governance. The ordered soul is not the soul that has no appetites. It is the soul in which appetite has been given its proper place, fed genuinely, not indulged endlessly, satisfied in ways that address real needs, not perpetually chased in ways that simulate satisfaction without providing it. This requires three things that almost nobody in the modern world has been taught to do. The first is examination, the practice of pausing before following an appetite and asking what it actually is. Not to deny it, not to judge it, but to understand it. Is this hunger, or is this boredom? Is this loneliness, or is this habit? Is this a genuine need that deserves to be met, or is this a craving that has been installed by something outside me and is now presenting itself as a need? This pause is not natural. It runs directly against the design of every system that profits from your appetites being followed automatically. The entire architecture of modern attention has been built to make the gap between impulse and action as small as possible, to ensure that the pull toward the phone, the food, the purchase, the click, is followed before examination can intervene. Reclaiming that gap is the beginning of everything, not because examination will always result in denial. Sometimes you examine the appetite and discover it is a genuine need and you should meet it. But the examination itself changes the relationship. You are no longer being driven. You are choosing, and choosing, even when you choose the same thing you would have done automatically, is a fundamentally different act. The second thing Plato recommends is the education of desire, not the suppression of desire, the education of it. He believed, and this is a more hopeful position than most people expect from ancient philosophy, that what you want is not fixed, that the appetites can be trained, that a soul that has been trained toward crude and immediately satisfying pleasures can be gradually retrained toward pleasures that are more sustaining, more genuinely nourishing, more capable of actually addressing the thing the soul is reaching for. This is a slow process. It does not happen through sudden conversion or dramatic decision. It happens through the gradual accumulation of different experiences and the gentle, consistent redirection of appetite toward things that actually satisfy in a lasting way. The person who has never experienced the specific pleasure of genuine intellectual engagement, of following an idea all the way down to its roots and finding something real there, does not know to want it. Their appetite has no template for it. So they reach toward what they know, toward what has provided relief before, even if that relief was shallow and brief. But every time you provide the soul with a genuinely nourishing experience, every time you follow an appetite toward something that actually addresses what it was looking for rather than just simulating the address, the appetite learns. It develops a new template. It begins to reach in a slightly different direction. This is not about becoming someone who no longer wants ordinary pleasures. It's about expanding what you want to include things that are worth wanting, and discovering gradually that the pull toward shallow satisfactions loosens its grip as the appetite learns that something better is available. Plato described this as the education of eros, the training of the soul's fundamental desire away from its lowest objects and toward progressively higher ones, not through force, but through exposure, through giving the appetite experiences of genuine beauty, genuine meaning, genuine connection, genuine understanding, until it begins to prefer them. The third thing is what Plato called the governance of the rational soul. This is where everything comes together. Examination creates the gap. The education of desire shifts what the appetite reaches toward. But neither of these is sufficient without the rational soul genuinely taking its place as the governing part of the psyche. Not through force, not through willpower in the ordinary sense of white-knuckling your way through resistance, but through the kind of genuine authority that comes from a part of the soul that knows what it's doing, that has earned the trust of the other parts, and that governs with wisdom rather than just with rules. The rational soul earns that trust through consistency, through making commitments and keeping them, through demonstrating to thumos and to appetite that the direction it has chosen is genuinely good and not just theoretically optimal. And it governs appetite, not by pretending appetite doesn't exist, but by working with it honestly, by acknowledging what it wants, by meeting genuine needs genuinely, by distinguishing clearly between the appetite that serves the life you are trying to build and the appetite that is consuming it. This is not a single decision. It is a daily practice, a practice of returning over and over to the question of who is actually governing this moment, whether the pull you're following was chosen or installed, whether the wanting is yours, or whether you have been moved by something you never examined. Plato called the soul that performs this practice consistently the just soul, not just in the moral sense, though the moral dimension follows from it, just in the structural sense, each part in its proper place, each part doing what it is genuinely for. The just soul is not a soul that has transcended desire. It is a soul that has learned to desire rightly. Here is what changes when you begin to govern your appetites rather than be governed by them. The first thing that changes is the quality of your attention. The appetitive soul, when it is running things, consumes attention entirely. Every moment is evaluated for its pleasure yield. Every discomfort becomes a problem demanding immediate resolution. Every gap in stimulation becomes an emergency to be filled. The result is a quality of attention that is perpetually scattered, perpetually reaching, never fully present to anything, because it is always already oriented toward what comes next. When appetite begins to be governed, attention stabilizes. The present moment becomes available in a way it wasn't before. Not because you have become indifferent to what you want, but because you are no longer being constantly pulled away from what is actually here by the next craving. This is what Plato described as the first fruit of the ordered soul. Not happiness in the simple sense, something more like presence, the capacity to actually be in your life rather than constantly reaching beyond it. The second thing that changes is your relationship to satisfaction itself. The ungoverned appetite is paradoxically the least satisfied of all states, because it is constantly reaching and never arriving, constantly consuming and never nourished. The soul in the grip of unchecked appetite develops a kind of tolerance to satisfaction. More is required to produce the same effect. The ceiling keeps rising. The arrival keeps being deferred. When appetite is governed and genuinely nourishing, satisfactions begin to replace the simulated ones. The tolerance reverses. Simpler things become genuinely satisfying. The pleasure available in an ordinary moment, in a real conversation, in genuine work, in beauty, encountered without the mediation of a screen, or a product, or a performance. That pleasure becomes available again, not because you have become ascetic, because the palate has been recalibrated. Plato described this as one of the deepest pleasures available to the ordered soul. Not grand experiences or refined entertainments, the simple pleasure of a life that is genuinely satisfying because it is genuinely yours. The third thing that changes is your sense of freedom. This is the one that surprises people most. The appetitive soul, when it runs a life, feels like freedom. You follow what you want. You pursue pleasure and avoid pain. You are beholden to nothing but your own desire. What could be more free than that? But Plato's observation, devastating in its accuracy, is that a soul governed by its appetites is not free. It is driven. Every moment determined by the next craving. Every decision made not by a genuine self that has examined its values and chosen its direction, but by whichever appetite happens to be loudest. The soul that governs its appetites feels, at first, less free. There is resistance. There is the discomfort of not following every pull. There is the specific frustration of the appetite that has been redirected. But underneath that frustration, something else begins to emerge. The experience of actually choosing, of moving through a day in a direction you have genuinely selected rather than a direction you have been carried, of making decisions that express something real about who you are rather than something automatic about what you've been conditioned to want. That experience is what Plato meant by genuine freedom, not the absence of constraint, the presence of genuine self-governance. And once you have felt it, even briefly, the other kind of freedom, the freedom of following every impulse automatically, begins to reveal itself for what it actually is. Not freedom, a very comfortable, very well-marketed, very thoroughly engineered cage. You are not your appetites. You contain them. You were shaped by them. You have, in many cases, been governed by them for so long that distinguishing them from yourself requires a kind of philosophical archaeology, a patient excavation of which wants are genuinely yours, and which were installed by forces that had no interest in your flourishing. But you are not them. There is a part of you that can examine them, that can ask what they are really for, that can distinguish between the craving that serves your life and the craving that is consuming it, that can redirect without suppressing, govern without tyrannizing, satisfy without indulging. That part is what Plato called reason, and its capacity to govern is not a fantasy or an ideal available only to philosophers in ancient Greece. It is available to you, not all at once, not without falling back into the patterns you've been in, not without the daily, unglamorous, necessary practice of returning to the question of who is actually running things right now, but available. The appetites that have been controlling you are not stronger than the soul that contains them. They are louder, and the difference between loud and strong is the whole distance between the life you have been living and the life that is waiting on the other side of the examination you have been avoiding. Plato waited 2,500 years to give you this. The question he is asking, quietly, from across all that time, is simple. Are you ready to want what you have actually chosen? Or are you going to keep following the wanting that was chosen for you? That question does not have a comfortable answer, but it has an honest one. And honest, Plato always believed, is where everything real begins.